Hello and good morning, and welcome to my channel, Voluptas Ocularum. It means pleasure of the eye. My name is Stephanie, and I have the day off work today, and I thought I would spend the day practicing some painting tutorials. So I have this little space set up in my office, and I am using Holbein paints today. This is a set of 14 that I put together based on the recommendation of the person who I'm going to be following tutorials from this morning. Her name is Maria Rachinska, or yeah, I think that's her name. I'll put it up on the screen. And she suggested this color palette. I've been using it for about 6 months. And I've put together some sketches based on her Patreon tutorials that she has available. So I have some leaves, I have some fruit. I'm using a few different types of paper. And I've got my iPad set up here already to watch the tutorials. And I thought it might be nice to film myself doing this. I can maybe get a sense of the progress as I work over the next little while. I'm not going to do these in real time because I don't want to make it seem like I'm demonstrating techniques because I'm just following the tutorial, and that is the creative property of Maria. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm trying to tell people how to do something or show them in detail what the techniques are. So I'm just going to put this on time lapse and maybe put in some natural forest sounds in the background. I don't know, something to do with autumn because it's now October 1st. So yeah, putting these on about 20 times the speed so you can actually watch them without having to watch the paint dry like I was doing. But if you're curious about the actual time it takes for all of this work to happen, I'm gonna pop in a real-time line here. So yeah, it really took a long time for me to work on these leaves. To do the entire sheet, it took me about an hour and 15 minutes. Not just this leaf, the whole sheet, so like everything that's on the page. But there were only tutorials for the large green leaf and then the smaller helicopter seed that's up in the upper right-hand corner of the page. So the other objects I was sort of trying to use the techniques that I had learned, but having to sort of figure out the color options and the technique myself. So who knows how good of a job I did. The first was this red beech leaf, and then there was a really cute little chestnut. I'm not sure if I made it look like a chestnut, but I did my best. And then there was a brown dried up leaf, and finally the helicopter seed. So I spent the morning trying to master these wet on wet techniques. And the techniques that Maria suggests using is an Alla Prima technique, which means basically you're setting down all of your colors in a single layer of wet on wet. And this is a technique that I have found to be really, really good for particular subjects. I haven't really practiced it on landscapes yet, but for these types of still life objects, it is a really good technique to use. And basically, you spend a lot of time wetting the paper and then dropping in the color and finally like using your brush to sort of massage the colors around. And you're doing this all as the paper is sort of slowly drying. And the final step is to lift colors from what you're working on. So you're depositing colors onto wet paper, you're sort of moving them around, and then you're lifting light spots if you need to. Although it's a good idea to sort of try to paint around any highlights as much as possible. Yeah, so that technique works really well for leaves. The more I worked, the more I understood like the paint had to be a certain consistency in order for it to spread properly. Of course, if you're working wet on wet, you can't really use a very watery paint. You have to use a more dry paint. So it takes a bit of a balance to try to get used to that. It's very different from painting on plein air, or even just like kind of painting in layers as I have done in the past. So yeah, but I really want to get to know this technique more, and I have been watching these tutorials for several months. I have painted along with a few of them, but this is my first day really painting along with them in real time, like I'm watching the tutorial for the first time while I'm painting. So that actually takes quite a bit of time to get to that stage, because previously I was watching the tutorial in full, just watching it, and then I would set up all my stuff, and then I would turn the tutorial on again, knowing kind of what to anticipate. This time I was actually just trying to work at the same pace as Maria in the video without having watched it previously beforehand. So I didn't really know what colors I was needing to prepare, or like how long we were going to spend on any particular subject. But I was able to follow along pretty well. So I think that shows that I've made some progress in these painting techniques over the past 6 months. I'm no longer feeling like lost at every stage. I remember the first tutorial that I did from Maria's Patreon was a series of winter trees. And at that time, I still didn't have very good paintbrushes, and I didn't have very good paper. I had a lot of cellulose paper, and it wasn't the best for wet on wet techniques. And I kept feeling so frustrated that oh my God, my colors are not spreading the way that hers are. My colors are not staying wet for as long as hers do. It's drying unevenly and in patches. And it was just really difficult for me, and I found it very frustrating. But after I switched papers, mostly using arches, although on this particular one, which is a plum, I started using Khadi 100% cotton rag. I think this is 220 GSM or 200 GSM. I got it as a stack. But the paper made a huge, huge difference. And then the brushes too make a bit of a difference. So in this one, I'm using a synthetic squirrel. It's a Tintoretto brush. I got it with one of the sets of A Gallo paints that I ordered. And initially, I was really unsure about using this brush, but over time, it has become one of my favorite brushes. I think initially I found it really difficult to control because it is so soft, but actually, once you learn how to use a soft brush and really control it, I think it can become one of your biggest tools in working in watercolor. I do use a synthetic brush from time to time too. I use an Escoda Perla. I also use synthetic rigger brush from ProArt. And then I have another synthetic round number 2 from Da Vinci that I got as part of a pack from the Frau Holle Florals edition. And I think I showed that in one of my other videos, but I'll put the link down below to all of the brushes that I used. But yeah, the soft brush is really adaptable in how you can use it because, of course, it holds a lot of water. So you have to be very, very careful with how you control the amount of pigment that you're depositing and the amount of water. But it's also very, very good for wetting paper, and you can then sort of squeeze out all the water and it becomes adaptable. So you can sort of shape it, and then you can use it to sort of push pigment around, and you can also use it to suck up pigment. So I find it a really great brush to work with, and that is what I've used the majority of the time in painting these fruits and leaves and still life objects. So after my plum success, I had more confidence. So I moved on to this apple, and I found the tutorials really easy to follow. Again, I've been a member of Maria's Patreon for about 7 months or so. I signed up for a yearly subscription because she has so many tutorials in her back catalog. I knew that I would need at least that long to go through and try to do the ones that I was really interested in. I would really recommend, if you're interested in learning wet on wet techniques and how to paint all in one layer, that you do go and check out her tutorials. She also has classes you can do on an individual basis on her website if you don't want to get something on Patreon. But her Patreon, I found very affordable, and it's one of the best set up Patreons for learning that I would say I've encountered. And I have tried a lot of different artist Patreons. I have kind of a thing about Patreon because I really do think it's a great platform, and when it's used well, it can be incredibly helpful. But what I do find is that a lot of artists tend to rely on the live Zoom a little too much. And so as somebody who has to attend a lot of Zoom meetings in my day-to-day work, there is no freaking way that you're going to get me onto a live Zoom outside of my paid profession. Like, I just don't want to do it. Like, first of all, why am I going to take time out of my life to just look at a reference photo? And usually, to be honest, not a very good one that's been put up on the screen. I'm not even seeing the artist actually paint or draw. I'm just seeing this reference image. And then they'll invite all of their friends along and basically just like talk amongst themselves about their kids, their families, and their most latest art retreat. And I just find it to be such an unwelcoming space. Like, I just do not feel like that is a place I want to be in. And I don't feel that I learn anything. I have no trouble actually drawing things. What I'm interested in is learning from artists. So unless the Zoom is actually showing the artist drawing or painting along with like what we're supposed to be doing, then I just don't know what the point is. Like, I could easily put up a reference photo and paint it myself, and it's going to have the same impact. So anyways, I have a thing about people who use Zoom too much and also invite all their friends along. And I just like think it's a little bit not something I want to pay for. So yeah, that's all I'll say about that. If I'm lucky enough to ever have enough followers or get to a point where I can teach techniques and things like that, then I make the vow to you today that I will not be having live Zooms where I put up a crappy reference image for you to draw and charge you money for it. Okay, so I finished off the grapefruits, and the third little fruit drawing that I'm doing here is nectarines. Now, I had seen this reference photo. I think it is from Unsplash, or it might be on a couple different free stock photo websites, but I think it's from Unsplash, and it is so beautiful. And I thought, like, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to capture the light and the vibrancy of these fruits. And I think like the benefit of doing tutorials is that the instructor has already sort of simplified the subject for you. So like, she has prepared sketches, and if you want, you can actually just print off the sketch and like use a light table or something to copy it onto your paper. So you don't even have to go through the sketching part if you don't want to, or if you just are feeling like you just want to get started with the painting. But they also make sort of like executive decisions about like, what leaves are we going to show? What branches are we going to show? And what are we going to eliminate from the scene? Which I find really helpful, because I do tend to get like quite overwhelmed by images. I always feel like I need to paint the whole image, and then I just get overwhelmed by details, don't know what to focus on. So when I'm doing these tutorials, what I find really helpful that Maria does is she takes it like literally piece by piece. So we do one nectarine at a time. We do one branch at a time. We do one leaf at a time. And that helps you to just focus on those objects so that when you're breaking it down into chunks, it doesn't feel so overwhelming. The goal is to get to a point where one day I am able to look at a drawing for myself and think about like, oh, what would be the best way for me to divide this into smaller subjects, or to break this into like its component parts and analyze it for what types of colors are going to be placed there, what layers need to be put down. I'm still in a sort of acquiring knowledge phase of my art journey. So it's nice to have somebody else tell you, like, this is the step we're doing right now. I find I really learn a lot from that. And it's okay that I can't do it for myself yet, like that I can't necessarily pick out all of the steps for myself, and that I'm just sort of following along with somebody else. It is still creative in that you still have to make decisions and you still have to learn while you're doing it. It's just that some of the decisions are sort of removed from your process, which really helps you focus on learning the techniques instead of having to learn the techniques while you're also making all of the other creative choices. On the next video, I did this the following day. So these are supposed to be citrus fruits. The one on the left is a mandarin and the one on the right is an orange. And as I was doing this, I used a different camera app, because I noticed that the previous day that my camera was sort of like focusing in and out whenever my hand was in the frame or my head was in the frame. And it also sort of changed the exposure which led to a really unpleasant sort of like strobe light effect in a way, where there was like all these differences between shade and light during the video. So I decided to try this other app. It's called Dreamlapse. And I was introduced to it by this watercolor artist who lives in northern Spain. And I'll put her information on the screen here. She also is a great artist. I don't follow her on Patreon or anything yet, but I might consider doing that in the future. But she developed this app for exactly the reasons I just said, that with regular camera apps, there were a few things that just weren't tweaked for doing art tutorials. So on this one, you can lock the exposure and you can lock the focus, which is really nice. Some phones might have the ability to do that, but I don't think all of them do. Mine certainly doesn't. I found that to be really helpful. Although what I did find is that if you're working next to a window, then if you focus the exposure when it's a little bit darker, you're not going to benefit from the subtle changes of light that may come in through the window. So I did have to increase the exposure on this afterwards while I was editing the video. But otherwise, it's a really good app and yeah, really helpful. I think that the challenge with these tutorials is some of them are quite old. So I think Maria's technique has changed and shifted over the years. And so the Mandarin was quite an early tutorial. I think it was from 2021 or something like that. And I don't think it really gives the sense of Mandarin. Like, it's a little too smooth. And I think that might be sort of the downfall of the Alla Prima technique. Is that like things just blend a little too much and you don't get any hard edges or texture. So I think that if I was to do this again, I would probably want to do a second layer. And I might even add in some white highlights, gasp, shock, horror. And I might use dry brushing to do that, to get sort of like these little bumps and the texture of the Mandarin skin. Because I think right now it's sort of reading apple, kind of, even though it's the wrong color, but it's like just too smooth. And the with the lemon, what I did was I tried to follow the tutorial as much as possible. However, in order to kind of get that bumpy lemon skin, I actually I went like off script from the tutorial and I just like used my tiny round number 2 brush to very, very lightly drop in tiny dots of water while it was drying. So almost like on purpose creating tiny blooms, and those blooms created white spots in the paint that sort of gave the impression that it was more textured. I don't know if it was wholly successful, but it didn't ruin the painting. So I'm happy about that. And yeah, so this was my still life object painting session. It spanned over 2 days. I was lucky enough to have some time off from work that I could spend a lot of time dedicated to painting. And I'm so grateful that I have, flexibility in my schedule that allows me to do this from time to time. And I feel like I really learned a lot from these tutorials. And the next things that I'm going to be practicing are some pumpkins because it's October. So maybe if I get a chance to film that next, I will do so. And I'll be sure to post that when it's ready. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again in the next video.